This is Lauren Schultz, writer and author of the Last Consort series. It is a romantic suspense series. If you like mystery and suspense and a little bit of romance, then this is probably going to be your read. We're going to go ahead and start reading chapter 2 today. And today I'm having a rose wine from California, which is a delicious one. So I'm enjoying this one. And let's go ahead and get started with chapter 2. Hi, guys. Hope you had a great week. And we are going to go ahead and get into chapter 2 of The Last Consort Escape, book 1 of the Last Consort series. Chapter 2. William read at a booth in the restaurant. The black imitation leather of the seat squeaked with every move he made, overshadowed by the sounds of soft music played overhead, which repeatedly drowned out from the traffic outside, sounding in spurts. He had been there for 15 minutes and not once looked up toward the door. Had he made a mistake? He thought of the patient who asked for him by forgotten name weeks before. A storm was brewing, and Patricia's reintroduction could offer nothing but an unsettling and disquieting reality for him to struggle with. He was done with his intermittent stops along the years. Now that he had stumbled upon Patricia with her ducklings crossing the street before him, he questioned himself. Why had he even agreed to do what he was doing? Patricia was the beginning of a venture he had no desire to be a part of. He was tired of that life and the factors that kind of life left behind like blood on a concrete slab. It was going to be a huge mistake. He knew it. He began to motion for the waitress, but stopped and stirred his coffee instead. 6:10. She was late. Perhaps she had changed her mind and wouldn't show. Perhaps he didn't know if he would be able to give her the answers that he was looking for. He admitted to himself of his selfishness, but it was worthwhile. If he tried to open a door to where he had been, it would take him back to a nightmare. Nothing he could comprehend could give him a reason to return to that place. William existed with the embodiment of a willful amnesia, but with it, he admitted to spending countless evenings by himself, more often as the years passed. Relationships raised questions. Friendships caused social events that made him uncomfortable and anxious. So it was best to channel those energies into other sources. He thought to simply never engage. It kept his nose clean. He heard the door open and close, not bothering to look up. His focus went to the open book on the table and the words that didn't make any sense. Who was he kidding? He'd never forgotten them. She was just a girl in her pajamas, and her sister having no real reason outside of James Evans' warped thoughts for being killed. There she was the day before, a caring mother who wanted answers probably to protect her own flesh and blood. They had become permanently attached to his memories and to his present. They would always be there. The taste of the stale air, the scar on his face, it was part of him. William? He looked up toward the voice to find Patricia, dressed in a pair of dark jeans that hugged her curves. He hadn't noticed her figure before, a perfect peanut armed with a pair of supple breasts perfectly aligned beneath her cream-colored sweater. Hello, he said as he stood up and shook her hand, welcoming her to the booth. Can I get you anything? No thanks. Come on, have something. Their coffee's pretty good. Fine, I'll have what you're having. William beckoned for the waitress. He could see that she was a little anxious as well. She didn't make very much eye contact and directed much of her attention to the world beyond the glass of the diner. He admitted that she was very attractive without force, perfectly toned skin pressed against her high cheekbones and large brown eyes complementing her shapely lips, which she coated tenderly with a shimmery brown lipstick. The dim lights of the diner made her honeyed brown skin nearly glow. He watched as she sat, anxiously gripping her hands together in a clump of fingers, his eyes wavering about the room, unable to connect. It was taking all his concentration to remain from leaving the awkward meeting. Thank you for doing this. I don't know how to thank you for what you did for us. If you weren't there, God knows what could have happened to us. Her words were like daggers to him, causing a painful guilt with each word. What she didn't know. He thought as he shook his head. I'm serious. We owe you. You don't owe me anything. She seemed more comfortable with eye contact with his last words. Finding her view straight at him with strength in her gaze, he quickly veered his glance in a new direction, then at the mug being swallowed by his hands. Why he had been suddenly affected by a sense of concern for the woman before him the evening before still troubled him. I've got so many questions for you. You can't imagine how it feels to not know why. She inhaled a great breath, as if fueling up on a means of repressing the thoughts that had abruptly returned. I'm sorry, you have to bear with me. He stopped and smiled, a forced smile to hide her pain. He knew it all too well. She had to forcefully change her way of living and never knew why. She had been forced to move miles away from her home and never knew why. What if all she wanted was closure? But did that even exist for her? It didn't for him. How could he even trust that his words were safe with her? The need to be comforted stained her movements. He could tell she was uncertain of exactly what he didn't know. Maybe she feared the truth. It was so close to her. It was there mixed into her words and body movements and the tears that had begun to fall and spill over her cheeks. William pulled a napkin from the dispenser adjacent to the blue tiled wall and handed it to her. Thanks. I don't think I ever got over what happened that night. It's still very vibrant. I understand. She nodded wearily, wiping the unexpected droplets from her eyes, reddening the whites. He watched as she attempted to compose her emotions. He was surprised when she smiled with his silence, however small and almost defeated it was. William sipped his coffee and waited for her words, impatiently judging whether he was doing the right thing. What if he was the only person left with answers? I never thought to ever see you again. After we met, nothing was ever said about what happened. My father, he vanished. He could be dead for all I know. But I just never felt that things were fine, you know? Because they're not. Things are not fine. That's what I was afraid of. Patricia looked up toward the waitress as she poured her a serving of hot coffee. What exactly happened? What he had dreaded suddenly hit him in the gut, a revisit to a past that he had tried so hard to get away from. She would make him uncover the dead he had buried years before. Look, I'm sorry, but I don't think I can do this. I thought I could, but I really don't think I can. I'm sorry? There's just a lot that I'm not trying to revisit, Patricia. He paused for a moment, recalling the night he had never forgotten and its aftermath. He remembered the dark. It was a dark so deep and thick that he had forgotten that the day and night crossed paths. There was only darkness. He was 17. He had known Evans since he was a child. The existence was all he had ever known. It was cold and lonely, far from a welcome family feel. He felt sick as his eyes fell upon Evans' daughter sitting before him. He swallowed hard, clearing his throat, and finally settled on taking another sip of coffee. The tide had turned so swiftly in a matter of days, after years of the same direction of the wind. Memories of a man he had never known collapsing to the ground flashed quickly in his thoughts, short, disturbing fractions as he tried to focus on the woman before him. Your father is an obsessive, controlling terrorist who screwed a whole bunch of people folks for years and ruined my life. So I've got a shitload of reservation. That's fair, I guess. Patricia observed him for a moment, her eyes meeting his. Then she reached out and traced the scar with her fingers on his cheek. The diagonal line ran from the midside of his right cheek down to the corner of his mouth, and another diagonal line on his neck. He saw it every day, reminding him of his past, of what he was. No words passed her lips for the first time in the time they had gathered. She studied him for a moment, almost silently communicating to herself. He retreated, sinking back into the seat as a taste of metal quickly entered his mind, the sharp point of a knife's blade scraping the top of his teeth. I'm sorry. This wasn't a good idea. I think I should go. No, wait, please. I apologize. Her small frame radiated with an unseen power and strength. He watched her as she adjusted her body in the seat. How long have you worked at Peter Ridge? About a half a year now. Do you like it? Look, we don't have to do this. Do what? Talk? Surely you felt the same way when you wrote the note. If you always felt that way, then why did you write it in the first place? He silently sank backwards in his seat. I thought you would be helpful. That's all. not an angry, unsociable person who probably locks himself up in a closet with bats each night. Bats? That's new. William looked at the eastern wall of the restaurant and searched for the clock he knew was there. The discomfort was suffocating and dense. Why had he written it? What impulse drove him to scribble down the information for her to find? Why did he even think that she wouldn't show? He hadn't planned on his words, her questions, her being so determined. She was unique, the creature before him, her eyes like those of an independent child, wide with a sudden awareness that she had found her own direction, dismantling him with each intense stare sent his way. You won't talk, so let me. Years ago, I remember seeing you with my father. I was sick, extremely sick. After one of his people did something to me, I never felt anything like that before or ever again. Then I saw you alone and suffering like I had. So I know, William, that I'm right about you, that you have answers, that you're not like them. Stop it. You talk too much. You have a chance to move on and never look back. I suggest you do that, Patricia. There's no need to add to the fire that you can't seem to extinguish. Pressure was building in his mind. All the dark corners he had hidden incidents related to the last 20 years were slowly being flooded with light. What she wanted was better in the dark. William didn't want to see it any longer and had parked it away into the unsaid. It was dangerous. It was risky to expose, mostly because he selfishly had been cowering in the caverns for the last years when he knew that Evans was still causing lives to burn. Yet he had done nothing to stop it from happening. Why couldn't he do as he told her to do? Move on. You can't just move on when there's a problem that can kill you. Look at you. I saw your wrist. He stopped everything, thinking, planning, even his assumptions, formulating about the woman. He hid what he had done even in the heat of summer. It was a difficult reality all his own, not belonging to her. He looked away for a moment, then focused on her again to keep his footing. What are you, a shrink? This isn't about me anyway. I think much of it is about you and you know it, which is why silence is better. I think you're a major part of it all. I also think you're lost. Not in the sense of answers. You've made it clear that you don't want to share anything. I think you're lost in however it is you fit into all of this. You don't know your place or where you should be. I go to work. I go home. I keep a low profile. I'm not proud of my past. Her stare was directed at him. He looked back down at the table, unable to direct attention to the being before him. Then he saw Patricia's hands cover his in a soft gesture of caring. What did he do to you? She asked almost to herself while staring past him, as if he was no longer in her presence. He had felt dead inside for so long. A slow growing scar had covered his words over the years, but it was still sore when touched and ached during storms. William sat alone in his thoughts and slowly began, as if speaking for the first time after being in a coma, breathing memory into words. I was a teenager, a confused teen, so I attempted and failed. Failed? What a choice of word, Will. What made you? The only way you'd understand is if you'd lived what I've lived, then you probably would tell me a better way. What have you lived? Maybe I'd actually understand. She took a sip of her coffee, her eyes still locked like missiles over a desert city. Then she smiled, delighted in her own thoughts. He could see her thinking, the words churning like time itself, moving, kinetic words. What are you smiling at? He asked. I think I scored a point, she said, concealing her smile behind the thick mug, the smoke dancing before her nose and eyes. She was charming. This isn't funny. I know it isn't. William thought for a moment. She was a charmer. She was clever with her words. You're amazing. Absolutely amazing. He stopped and laughed, taking his hand against his face, feeling his cool skin beneath his even clammier hands. He'd never in his life met a woman quite like her. He could tell she was intuitive and smart. In conversation, her strategy was as a silent player, making unexpected moves that upset her opponent, and her stare, that look sent a weakness about him, one he'd never experienced before. He wanted to get out of there, but at the same time, he was drawn by her very presence. I'm sorry, I'm obviously making you uncomfortable. It doesn't take much for you to figure some things out now, does it? She rolled her eyes. Look, I saw the scars and I wondered if your having done what you did had anything to do with what my father was, maybe what he did to you. He couldn't believe what he was about to do, but it felt so natural. She was so hypnotic to him that he couldn't help but feel that his words were safe. He took a breath. I hit rock bottom maybe 10 years ago. I went from one bad situation to an even worse one, and I didn't I had no other way out. Maybe I no, you asked, so I'm going to tell you. I haven't been good at such things this evening. He studied the veins in the wood of the table, each leading to nowhere in particular as he spoke. I tried getting out of a life I didn't want anymore and ended up his voice faded off. I I just couldn't. I shut down and couldn't. His words stopped as the memories he had repressed for so long melted from their icy, forgotten caverns of memory. He had been confined in darkness for 3 days and fed crap like an apocalyptic internment camp. Power had been stripped from his being. So it had come to this, an animal, an experiment with no meaning. He wished he had died in the forest. He had successfully taken a clipboard from one of the crooks who came to check his vitals and created a gnarly device sharp enough to cut, but dull enough to become obscenely brutal, medieval in a way. He wanted it to end. He wanted it all to end. Then they would have no more control. He would be free. William held the metal in his hand and rubbed the edges obsessively with his fingertips in the stillness of loneliness. Alone in his thoughts, yet in control and in command of his own fate, he took a deep breath and lifted the sharp edge of the metallic spring and forcefully jabbed it into his skin. Nothing. Then he did it again and again and again until he struck ore. The cold of the metal cooled his warm arm. He pressed into his flesh and pulled, watching through blurred vision as the red river of blood spilled over his pale skin down to the cold cement floor. The cut burned as he took the device into his opposite hand, tearing the flesh beneath for a second time. William leaned his head against the wall, waiting for his final breath, for his silver cord to be severed from the angels that laughed at him from above. He cut his flesh again, this time with experienced speed and accuracy as thoughts of discomfort and failure encouraged him to allow death to take him away, away from the world, from his existence. His surrounding world slowly died. The world no longer existed to him. Sound stopped, and darkness, an eerie darkness, warm and surreal, overtook his very sense of being into its claws. Then he heard footsteps. I should have finally died that afternoon, but they interfered. Eventually, I don't know how or why, I met a person who saw me as a person instead of a lab experiment. She saw, quote, potential in me, unquote. She pulled some strings real tight and helped me. I'm a living example of several proverbs. With this thought, his eyes began to burn from tears. He quickly grabbed a napkin from the metallic dispenser, trying to avoid being seen. I'm sorry. That's okay, she gently spoke, covering his fingertips with her hand. There was a freedom about him after his emotional spoilage. My God, I didn't know. Not many people do. She smiled a thin smile and leaned back in her seat, taking her cup into her hands. She said, my coffee's cold and I think I want some pie. Do they have good pie? Never tried it. He smiled and beckoned for the waitress again. Am I getting one slice of apple or two? He reluctantly accepted a piece. The world beyond the glass of the diner had turned a dark blue, with a tiny streak of orange falling in layers in the western sky. He had seen many nightfalls from the diner, but there in the company of the unique bird before him gave it a different soundtrack, creating a whole new theme never experienced before. He watched as she pointed to the triangular pastry before her, explaining to the waitress to heat it up and include the ice cream that she had not received to be served in a separate dish. She used multiple hand movements to explain her desire and ended with a thank you that incorporated her whole face in an almost prayer hand-like position beneath her nose. Patricia quietly began to nibble on her dessert, viewing each piece as if searching for any surprises that might have lurked into her food. My aunt makes a really good apple rhubarb pie. The rhubarb takes on this taste of the apples, but has its own distinct consistency. Wait a minute. You're not going to get away with this. What about you? Really? She huffed. Are you this way with everyone, or is it just me? He joked. She opened her mouth in joking amazement. I'm just kidding. They both laughed, a ceasefire settling between the two. It's my turn. She nodded and returned to his forgotten cup of coffee. Patricia thought for a moment and wrapped her fingers against the almost mirror like wood of the table surface. As if reciting her biography from a book sleeve, she began her story. I have a dead end job at a dying bookstore. I'm going to school to complete a degree I should have completed years ago. I try to live normally, but my mom keeps me nervous. I made stupid mistakes. What did you do? I got married, she joked, leaning her whole body toward him. Her slender fingers were naked, no rings, no marks. I was young and rebellious and not old enough to drink. He was the worst mistake I've ever made. The only gift he gave me is my children. There was a sudden solemn stare about her, as if the thoughts of her past relationship were extinguishers of her current stature. Whatever had happened to make the relationship end was likely a nasty brew of mess. It was obvious in the quieted words she held captive. Yet her charm remained, each word delivered carefully from her tongue. The words were crafted and layered out to his ear with precision, her lower lip stretching perfectly straight for the E's, her mouth a perfect circle with the O's. She was giving her heart a receptacle of caring. He noticed that in the hospital room as she spoke with her daughter, and there in the diner as she caressed his fingertips. The two were quiet, allowing their stories to settle into one another's minds. The street traffic had died down enough to hear the music from the diner's radio. How are your mom and your sister? He asked. They're both fine. He recalled the flash of the blade as the blue moon's light struck the metal, then the burning kiss as the blade came down against his skin. That's good. And Lisa and Alex. Fine. Lisa's doing better already. Alex keeps asking me about the circus. It's driving you crazy. He nodded quickly with a grin. She nodded quickly with a grin. I'm sorry. My distraction trick doesn't work for parents. I'd hope to make that up to you. He looked at his watch, 8 o'clock. The meeting he had never wanted to begin had become one with opposite desires. He could stay in her company all night. I better let you go. I know you've got little fireflies waiting for you. I'm sorry if I. No, he thought for a moment. If anything, I should thank you for helping me deal with some things I haven't before. Besides, I didn't answer your questions. Maybe some other day. I didn't realize that some answers would bring back painful memories for you. I'm sorry. Patricia fumbled around her black Michael Kors bag. She finally pulled out a business card and fanned it in the air. Feel free to call me. We can start some sort of support group, she said with a smile. She slipped the card to him and then stood. He paused, observed her name and number, then pocketed the card. Standing, preparing to shake her head, she instead took both of his hands into her own. They were soft and warm beneath his skin. Looking into him, she responded with, I want you to know that you are loved. I don't know what you did, but I know that you did do something good, and you do something good every day caring for people. I don't think you feel that way. You don't have to answer if I'm right or wrong. I could very easily be wrong, but whatever it is, it's eating at you. If you let things eat away at your spirit, you're allowing it to kill you. Don't do that to yourself. She then pulled him down toward her and squeezed. He closed his eyes. It was a moment of sheer bliss, and with his eyes silenced, he could only recall positive events as if all her love was being transferred over to him. Osmosis. She then softly kissed his cheek. Take care, okay? He watched as she walked past the empty booths of the diner and through the door's threshold as a part of his soul came to life again. Chapter break. The white smoke from the metallic comb rose above Lisa's head, creating a steady stream of rising heat. It tickled Patricia's nose. With care, she straightened her daughter's hair, changing her naturally kinky heritage into conformity. She tenderly rubbed the cottony bells of thick fudge-colored hair to her child's head. It was soft yet strong as the strands clung in unison, tightly weaving into one another. She then slipped her fingers through the thinner strands of heated hair. It, too, was strong, but not as strong as it had once been. It felt limp in fashion against Lisa's cheek, stagnant. It had lost its ability to reach upward. The sharp digital scream of the telephone disrupted her thoughts. No matter how preoccupied Patricia became, the phone's ring always startled her. She could be staring dead at the damn thing, expecting its voice, and it would still make her jump. Hello? She spoke as she fumbled with the device. Pat, how's Lisa doing? Christine, her younger sister, asked. She was her baby sister by 2 years. After making mistakes herself, Patricia had encouraged her to do what her parents would have preferred. Christine was nearly finished at a UC, living the life as shopper from Patricia's pantry. She's a lot better. We wouldn't have survived in this household had we not gone the other day. Good. Mom thought you were terrible for even letting her get an earring. How could I help that? Bath water, drinks before bed, you know. But Lisa's your kid, so I don't know why she'd even talk to me about it. You know, Mom, they laughed. She then held the cell against her skin, tighter, thinking about what she should say next. The smooth surface became heated against her face. Patricia thought of William's bashful smile as he offered her a cup of coffee, the scar on his face, his hesitancy in his answers, the scars on his wrist. Had it been a mistake? What would her sister have to say about the whole meeting? Chris, there was a nurse that treated Lisa. I had coffee with him last night. That cute, huh? No, it wasn't that. She felt a warm swell on her cheeks, getting a slight smile. Her response surprised her. I knew him from somewhere. There was no answer for a moment. What do you mean? I mean, I knew him from somewhere. You know him too. Patricia sensed that her ambiguity annoyed Christine. She was a fanatic about straightforwardness, and the direction of the conversation was headed far off course of it. What do you mean I know him? Where would I know him from? Chrissy, I want you to think back to that night, the night the cabin burned down. Patricia could almost hear her sister's thoughts. Never was that disturbing night ever discussed between them. It had never passed their lips in one another's presence. It had happened. That was all. When conversations of their father came to mind, only the positive events were uttered. According to any family member, Patricia and Christine had grown up in a sunny, warm Southern California, far from a little town in Nevada County. Come over for lunch and I'll fill you in. End of chapter. Thanks so much again for joining me today. I'm going to go ahead and finish my rose. And this is delicious. This is a California rose. So I'm going to go ahead and enjoy this as you enjoy the rest of your week. And I hope you have a happy reading. If you, again, would like to read ahead of me, or if you would like to purchase the book, you can purchase The Last Consort Escape on Amazon. You can also follow me on Instagram and Facebook and here on YouTube for my channel and get information as to how to purchase the book that way as well. Thanks so much, and thanks for reading.